Aloha, Corri Beadle here. Welcome to episode 6 of the Radical Love podcast, where we're talking about how a revolution in love will transform your life. I'm so very pleased to get to introduce our guest today. It's truly an honor. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He is the best-selling co-author of Project Everlasting, New York Times best-selling book. Amazing. He's the creator of Cracking the Man Code. He has impacted millions of women worldwide, helping them understand the hearts and minds of men and attract the relationship they desire. As a sought-after dating and relationship expert, he's appeared on, a few shows you might have heard of: The Today Show, CNN, Headline News, Oprah and Friends, ABC, the Hallmark Channel, the Style Network, and many others. He has a remarkable blend of humor, science, spirituality, and practical advice that creates an experience that is really rare. It's engaging and highly effective for finding lasting love. So please help me give a very warm welcome to my teacher, my colleague, and my friend, Mr. Matt Boggs.
Hey, Corri, thank you for that great introduction.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. I'm just speaking the truth. That's just you. That's just who you are. That's just you doing the work.
Well, I'm blessed. I feel blessed to be podcast number 6.
Yes. 6.
Yeah. Good things come in 6s, I think.
You think so?
I just made that up.
Okay.
I think we can claim that.
I'm claiming that. I'm owning that. And I love how I was ready to lean in and go, tell me more, teacher.
Oh, yeah. 6.
6. The power of 6.
Yes.
Come up with some things for sure. I'll think on that. Yeah, it's going to be a really beautiful and powerful conversation, as all of them have been. And I was just really looking forward to having this chat with you, my friend. I had the pleasure of reading your book recently, Project Everlasting. I've heard a lot about it because, again, I've had the pleasure of hearing your story at a number of Dream Builder Lives, as well as you were one of my trainers and coaches in the Life Mastery Institute. So I've heard about it, and I've actually picked it up. I've read it, and it's fantastic. It's remarkable.
Thank you. So you heard some great stories from these couples.
I heard great stories from the couples, and your great story, and Jason, your co-author's great story. Yeah. And it was beautiful and really profound because I felt very omniscient, right? This was published in 2007.
Yeah.
So like 12 years ago.
That's
and
right.
So much has happened for you. Your journey, that is just...
So we wrote that book.
Yeah.
And the whole impetus of the book, for the people who are listening right now, was to, as a bachelor and having gone through a very significant, painful breakup, very tumultuous, really pattern of relationships, I wanted to find out what the secrets to love really are. And I didn't want to hear it from scholars. I wanted to hear it from the people who were in the trenches, really the people who were living it day in, day out, who had created these great relationships, great marriages for over 40 years was the criteria we had set for ourselves. And so my best friend and I traveled 12,000 miles interviewing America's greatest marriages, and then came back and wrote the book. And then the book came out, and literally was the last stop on the book tour that I met my wife at a book signing. It was the Los Angeles Wedding Expo, and she was there, engaged to be married to some other guy.
Shut up. I didn't know that.
I'm kidding. I'm joking. No, she was working another booth. People always say, you were at the Wedding Expo? Was she like engaged, or she was a bridesmaid? No. She was working another booth, and I saw her, and how I showed up in this, listening to these couples, implementing these principles completely changed my life, changed how I related to myself first, and then how I showed up in relationship. And so I approached her differently than I would have in the past. And it led to something beautiful. We have 3 adorable little kids, almost 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And so life is hectic and wild and fun and slobbery
and
right now.
Man, you're living the dream.
Living the dream right now.
I mean, I'll tell you, there were tears when I was reading your book. I was moved. A number of the stories, in particular, your grandma's story.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, it was also going back to the omniscient part, just knowing that, like, oh man, Matt was out there on his green growing edge, out there on the leading edge to get to where he was, and that I already know that. Yes, like you said, it's all come together. You are married to the love of your life. You have 3 children, and in some conversations we've had, and that was your dream, to have 2 girls and a boy, and you have 2 girls and a boy, and you have the image of your young son with curls in his hair coming down at Christmas, and that's, you know, all these things that you held for yourself and took action that in the direction that you knew to go, even though at times it was scary. And here you are. And so we're going to talk about that journey in terms of radical love, because I hear, and I love you said, you know, one of the first things you had to do is change how you related to yourself. Mm-hmm. And in part of your journey, and you've shared your story, is, and this is what I'm curious about, is you've told the story, and I'd love you to tell that here, about being on the island, right? You were always into personal development since you were a teenager. There's some great stories about that in the book too. Y'all got to get this book. And you know, like you're like, you're like 15 and you're in these personal developments, and this older man is talking to you, and you're and you're doing these really intimate things, but you've been in the work. And I get that, because I was doing that as a teenager too. So really? Yes, since I was 14. So I get it. But you were open to that, and where you were talking about, like, well, I don't know, you know, and he's talking about his divorce, but all of that led to a place where you are now experiencing longing and discontent. Yes. So you go to an island, you know, to try to shift that. Well,
it was a proverbial island. So, you know, for anyone out there who you have a longing for deeper love in your life, whether it's you're in a relationship and you would love it to be more connected, you would love there to be less strife, less fights, less stress, or you've been on a path where you're really wanting and you're longing for that deep relationship in your life. And you might be the person who you've been taking care of somebody else, a mom, a dad who's elderly, or your kids, and now they're finally out of the house. And now you're turning the focus on yourself. And there's the fear that rises up that says, wow, I've been out of this for so long. I don't know really the steps to take. There's all this fear, like, am I these paradigms that will rise up, and what's the right approach? How do I do this? Or there's the discouragement that sets in, because you might be the person who you've been dating. You've been putting in the effort. You've been going online, offline, going out, and it's just bad date after bad date, or a relationship that doesn't work out, or somebody who ghosts you, and it's just painful. And that insidious voice comes into your head and says, hey, it might not work out for you. Yeah. Maybe you're not destined to find the person that you want to be with. Because that's where I was. I was putting in tons of effort. I was the guy who was brought up saying, you can do anything you put your mind to. If you work hard enough, you can create any result you want. And so I did. I created lots of dreams for myself by the time I had graduated from college, from playing college football to getting a job that I loved, to being graduating with honors, all kinds of stuff. And I always came through lots of work. And yet in my love life, it seemed like the harder I tried, the worse it got. I mean, it was just, and so there was this huge wave of discouragement that set in for me, where I was like, maybe it's not going to happen, which is an interesting, I know on one level people hear that and they're like, well, you were in your like late 20s thinking that. Mm-hmm. And while I may have been young, the intensity of that emotion was as big as anything I'd ever felt. And that intensity of that emotion, whether you're in your 20s or your 30s, and you're thinking, I might not have the family I want, the clock is ticking for women, for example, or whether you're in your 60s and you're like, I've been single for 20 years, it might not happen for me to find someone who I really feel like is my match, my equivalent. I don't want to settle. I've got a great life, And so that thought of it might not happen. That thought of I might destined to be alone is a very, very challenging place to be. And that's exactly where I was. And so I also knew enough to know that you can't see the picture when you're the one in the frame. And I figured, look, if I've been trying this hard and it hasn't been working, I've got to have some blind spots. Yeah. I've got to have some things that I'm doing that's not working. And it's a really, really healthy thing to get feedback. Mm-hmm. And so I had heard about this event, this seminar, and it was a personal development experience. It was up in the woods in this retreat center for 7 days. And so I show up to that. It was a very big investment for me at that time in my life. And I put down the investment. I said, okay, I'm going to go to this. And on the middle of the week, it was day 4, I find myself sitting in a row of 50 chairs, and there's 50 men, 50 women. The women are all standing in front of the men. The men, we all have clipboards. And the facilitator says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a game. And we're going to call this the island game, which is why, Corri, you're saying that I went to an island. This was the island game. And the facilitator said, okay, here's how the game works. Gentlemen, your job is to keep a tally of the number of yes votes and no votes you receive from these women. They're going to vote on you. And here's the question. Ladies, if this was the last guy on the planet to choose from, would you want him with you stranded on a deserted island? Or would you prefer just to be alone? Not based on his attractiveness, based on his beingness. Yeah. Ladies, you can't explain. Your job is to look every man in the eye and you vote yes or no on him. It got real awkward real fast. The tension in that room skyrocketed. We're looking at each other as the guys were like, are you serious right now? Okay. And then, so our job was to keep tally. So the women started going down the line and voting on us, yes, no, yes, no. And by the end, we had our number. And so the facilitator says, gentlemen, please stand up and order yourself from the man who got the most yeses down to the man who got the most nos. And so we start comparing numbers. We start organizing ourselves. And when it was all finished and we were all organized, I was second to last, having the most no votes. There was only one guy out of 50 men who had more no votes than me. And that guy was a total jerk. Like, nobody liked that guy. That guy was like the guy. I'm looking at this guy going, wow, I'm standing next to you. And I'm looking down a long line of men who are all voted higher yeses than me. Mm. And it's in that moment, my awareness, it got real clear that, wow, this is a game, but it's a reflection of actually how my love life has been going. I haven't been voted yes by the women that I have liked. Mm. And so I wanted to know why was I in that? I was, number one, embarrassed about where I was standing. And I wanted to know why. And so the facilitator, she was brilliant. She goes, is there anyone surprised by where they're standing right now? And so I sheepishly raised my hand and she goes, okay, Matt, good. Is there any woman who'd be willing to give Matt the gift of feedback? Whew. And share why they voted no on Matt? And all these hands shot up in the room. And I was like, oh my gosh, like imagine, for everyone listening right now, imagine if you're in that spot and you're like, okay, I'm going to get some feedback. But I agree with Ken Blanchard, where he says feedback is the breakfast of champions. Mm-hmm. Are we strong enough to look at real feedback in the face? And we're not talking about looking to the opinions and the approval of others. That's not how we govern our lives. That's not how successful people operate. But when there's a consensus, we're not talking one or two, but there was like, I'm voted by a group of women, second to last. There's something happening. When you start to see a pattern in your life, having the courage to look it square in the face is the first and often the hardest step in true change. Mm-hmm. for us to really get honest with ourselves and take a true assessment. Nathaniel Branden wrote a book called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. And pillar number 1 is acceptance.
Yes.
Are we willing to, and beyond accepting ourselves, which we're going to talk about, it's, are we willing to accept the facts?
Yes.
Are we willing to look at the truth? We want to lose weight. Are we willing to accept the facts that we're probably eating sugar in hidden places that we're not supposed to be eating it, and lying to ourselves saying, no, I'm eating healthy. This was me like 3 years ago. I completely changed my diet. And I was like, why am I not being as fit as I want to be? And I was going to the gym all the time, but I was carrying around an extra 20 pounds. And I was kidding myself about how much I would pour creamer into my coffee, a bunch of cream and sugar. I would eat it in other ways. And I would say, well, I'm not having dessert, but I was filling myself with all kinds. And it was so eye-opening to say, okay, am I willing to be honest with myself and about really what's going on? So they raised their hands, and one by one they stood up, and one by one it was very interesting. They all shared a same reason, but in kind of different experiences, and that they felt, the way they put it was, they felt judged by me. That they didn't feel like accepted for who they were by me. And I'm in my mid-20s at this point. And that was really, number one, hard for me to receive, because I didn't feel like I was judging them. But I remember that night laying in a bunk bed. We were all in, it's a cabin, right? So there's a giant cabin, 50 men. I'm laying in this bunk bed, and I'm contemplating what they're saying. And it dawns on me in that moment that there was a thread of truth. That when someone's giving you feedback, it's there's a part of us that comes from ego that wants to get defensive, that says, you're wrong and here's why. That's a very human part. But in the courageous move is to what's called look for the thread of truth. Even in a disagreement, in an argument, you're with your spouse, or you're with a coworker, you're with a family member, and they're saying, hey, I'm feeling angry and here's why. And they're giving you feedback. Look for the thread of truth. If there's a thread of truth, acknowledge that first. Learn from that first, and then pick up whatever position you want. But look, that's where the real learning is in the thread of truth. And the thread of truth was that they all had this common experience. And I began to ask why, and it dawned on me like a 1,000-watt light bulb awareness went off. I was like, holy moly, I am so hard on myself.
I knew it. Yeah.
I'm so critical of myself, so judgmental of myself, so hard, not willing to accept myself, not willing to forgive myself for mistakes, not willing to embrace myself, critical of myself. My internal dialogue was nasty.
Yep.
A lot of self-loathing for areas that I wanted to change. And that was such a strong feeling in me that that's what I was broadcasting. You see, and your listeners know this, our energy field doesn't stop with our skin. There's a great quote, I think it's Jim Carrey, who says that our souls do not live in us, we live in our souls. Like our soul is not contained within the limits of our body. Our body is contained within the limitlessness of our soul, I think is how it goes. Yeah. And I love that, because your energy field is broadcasting out, and we can feel each other. Like when you're around someone and you're saying, hey, they have a good vibe. I really like being around them. It's just something about them. And you're around someone else and you're like, whoa, I really don't like their vibe. Well, vibe, what are we saying? Vibe is short for vibration. It's their vibration. And you and I are emitting vibration all the time. And so it was that night, laying in that bunk bed, having this awareness, like, wow, I knew that this was the first step, really learning to accept myself, forgive myself, what is this self-love all about? Which is why I'm really thrilled about what you're doing, Corri, because radical love, courageous love, brave love, starting with ourselves, is the work that really transforms the world.
Yes.
Because much of the pain that gets created in this world is pain that's sourced in self-loathing, sourced in self-pain that then has to express itself. And so I went on a journey to solve this. And so that I could learn not only how to love and accept and forgive myself, but then also then how to forge and create an amazing connection and a relationship with someone else. And that's what sent me on the Project Everlasting journey. And traveling 12,000 miles, interviewing over 300 couples for how are you doing this? And then reading every book I could also on self-love and self-acceptance. And so that's really where, and since then I've been able to transform that. Since then, what's funny is that people who know me today, coach with me today, because I've taken this on, will often say, like, Matt, like, I can't even imagine you being judgmental. I can't even imagine you being critical, because you're so loving and so accepting. I'm like, well, I wasn't born that way. It's like, this is work that I've done to really learn, oh, wow, this is really the higher calling.
And you know what I would actually add to that, my friend? I think you were born that way, but we are taught to forget.
Well, good point.
Right?
Good point.
You're born that way. You see this in your beautiful babies, right? They've just loved themselves. And then we go out into the world, and well-meaning adults, sometimes family members, often the world itself will say, yes, but we're really going to love you when you do X, Y, and Z.
That's a great point. And I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
I know you do.
I was born that way.
Yeah, right?
Forgot along the way and had to reclaim that. Absolutely.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing is that, we and everybody listening has the awareness and the desire to reclaim that, because not everybody does. Right? So how grateful we can be that, oh, yeah, it's work, and looking in the mirror and looking at those things like, oh, all right, maybe I was unskilled there. Maybe I X, Y, and Z. But we cannot, as we talked about recently, your words, we cannot understand and unroot years of belief unless we make ourselves vulnerable for that.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we open ourselves up to do that work.
And here's the funny part about vulnerability. What is the fear of being vulnerable? Why are we afraid of vulnerability? Because we're afraid of the rejection that would come if we're vulnerable and people don't receive it well. So the irony of this is that it's often vulnerability that creates the missing connection. Yes. It's vulnerability that deepens the connection that we have with other people. And so I had this whole wired up differently, where I was putting on kind of a looking good complex, what I wanted most was connection. Yeah. And so, like, especially at that event, mid-20s, I was trying to be perfect, look good, put on this persona. Like, people say, I don't feel like I really know you, like not being authentic enough, not being vulnerable really enough of who I was. Yeah. And because I wanted connection, it was actually costing me the very connection I wanted. Mm. And the fear of the vulnerability being that, oh, I might be rejected, is the path to true connection, is the antithesis of rejection.
It is. It's both ironic and it's a paradox. It's paradoxical in the way when you think, yeah, it really is. It's you got to put yourself out there. And I think it really does stem from, as you said, you had to change how you first related to yourself. So it's really doing the work of, I'm going to love me no matter what, whether this person accepts, rejects, right? Or it's just not meant to be, but it's unconditional love. And yes, we can be proud of our accomplishments,
So before this interview is done, we won't do it now, but before this interview is done, I will share with everyone a vulnerable moment that my wife shared with me. That was the moment I knew I'm in love with this woman.
Oh, shut up. Okay. The
moment I said I'm in love with this, and it was an awkward, totally vulnerable moment. So we'll do that before we end this interview here.
I would love that. Thank you. Because that, as you said, that forms connection. Like, oh, there's a human being in front of me. There's somebody who experiences life like I do versus some sort of there's a facade. We sense this, whether we call it our gut, our intuition, our still small voice, or as Mahatma Gandhi called it, the voice for truth. We know that radar, we have an antenna, and we can get the sense of, oh, this person there's some front going on here, versus, this is a genuine, authentic human being, and tell me more. Tell me more. I want to know more about this person. And that's whether it's an intimate relationship with a spouse, a loved one, a partner, or friends, or family. And then actually I'd love to talk to you about how we, continue that. So your book, Project Everlasting, I highly recommend it, not just for those who are still in the process of downloading their relationship from the metaphysical, right? Downloading, having it, occur in this realm, but those of us who are in the relationship and we want to have that project everlasting, would you share with us because I haven't talked about this yet, the process for the 10-minute sweaty conversation?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, in every relationship, even really healthy relationships, and I have a sense that most people know this intuitively, but especially when you're dating, there can be the paradigm that says, oh, something's wrong here because we're having a conflict. It's not having conflicts that is the issue. It's in our ability to communicate through them and grow through them where the shortfall happens. And the conflict can actually bolster and strengthen the relationship if handled well. Challenge is, how do you handle it well? How do you handle conflict? How do you bring up a disappointment? How do you bring up an irritation? How do you do those things? And so I've learned a couple of tools. I haven't invented these tools, learned a couple of tools from mentors of mine that I'll share with you that have been game changers, relationship savers, and that embolden and strengthen and galvanize the relationship. So it starts with the concept of shoveling while the piles are small. Because emotions, as my mom would like to say, you can bury a stick, you can bury a can. You can't bury a worm. Worms always find their way back to the surface, and that's the way emotions are. So if something's irritating you and you think about it more than 24 hours later, bring it up. Even if it's small. And in the relationship, you get both people give each other permission to shovel while the piles are small. What happens is that people don't want to bring up small issues because they were taught to sweep it under the carpet. They stuff it down, but those emotions wiggle their way back up. And then what happens is they get to a point where you've experienced it so many times. Someone doesn't put their dishes away. You're constantly cleaning up after them. And it's no big deal. Wash a dish, put it away. But after the 30th time you're doing it, now it's become a pattern. Now it's become an issue. Now it's like, put your freaking dish away. People will explode. And so step number one is get permission to shovel while the piles are small, which means that if you're thinking about it 24 hours later, or you're irritated about it, the next time it happens, bring it up and speak about it. And you both get permission that is not too small to talk about for the purpose of building and strengthening the connection. And so we in our family will use the word, I'm feeling a little rattle about this. I'm feeling a little rattle that I would love to just clear the air with you about, so that we can have a deeper connection. There's always the so that, and then state the intention so that I can maintain the strong connection that we have. And then the sweaty 5-minute conversation is, I think it was originally called the sweaty 10-minute conversation, developed by Dr. Gay Hendricks, who's a mentor of mine, is just brilliant. And the core of it, I'll give you the abbreviated version here. There's 3 steps to this. The core of this is, here's what I see, here's what I want, here's how I feel. Because relationships, the foundation of love, it was Dr. Pat Allen who said that love, the definition of love, is the agreements that we're willing to make and keep. The agreements that we're willing to make and keep. So, interestingly enough, and we can talk about this more later, we know we're willing to love other people by the agreements we're willing to make and keep with them. Are we going to show up when we say we're going to show up? Are we going to hang out with them on the weekends? Are we going to serve them when it's not easy? But also the agreements we're willing to make and keep with ourselves. How we know we love ourselves. Am I keeping my agreement with myself? If I say I'm going to meditate in the morning, am I waking up and meditating in the morning? Am I doing it, or am I hitting snooze 3 times? You know what I mean? And here's the thing. I'm saying this because we've all done that. Like, we've all had these experiences. If I say I'm going to go work out 5 times this week, am I going to the gym? And there are those times when when we don't go or we don't do it. And the first phase of love is being able to show up and keep those agreements with yourself. Because what happens is when we keep the agreements with ourselves, we're demonstrating to the subconscious, the self-image, that you matter. What you say matters. How you feel matters.
Yes.
What you claim for yourself when you're in a high state of awareness, saying, I want to be healthy, or I want to be more connected to spirit. Then when you follow through on that, you're showing yourself worth. One the first place that we actually start to degrade our self-worth is in the conversations we have internally and the broken agreements we make with ourselves. Or I should just say it, the agreements we break with ourselves, saying that you're going to work on your book this week and you're going to write your book and you don't even sit down to write because you get too busy and say, oh, so you get put on the back burner and your self-image says, oh, I'm a back burner self-worth. Right. You're not back burner self-worth. You're amazing self-worth. You've got the spirit of life in you, breathing in you, but it's about, are we willing to value ourselves that way? And are we willing to step up that way? So in relationships, most use the sweaty 10-minute conversation when there's a broken agreement, right? Someone said they're going to show up to dinner at 7 and they're late. Someone said they're going to do something and the agreement gets broken. A lot of it is unspoken agreements. Like when you're dating and like the person doesn't get back to you for a few days, they kind of ghost you and then they pop in, they're like, hey, how's it going? You're like, where have you been? And you don't just want to proceed as if nothing has gone wrong because you're still feeling this rattle. How do you have that conversation, right? So 3 things. Here's what I see. Here's how I feel. Here's what I would love. So I'll give you an example of Irene and I. So I work from home. I'm married. It'll be 8 years in August. And so this was maybe like a year ago. I said I was going to be done with work at 6 and to come downstairs and help with the kids.
Yes.
And it was like 6:45. I'm still up here working. Okay. This isn't just a one-time thing, right? I had been doing this, say I'll be done at 6 and then I'll just like finish some emails, a call comes in. I'm like stretching it, trying to get as much done as I can before I go downstairs. And so I come downstairs and Irene is just up to her neck with kids and diapers and trying to get food and bath time and the whole thing done. And I come down. And so here's a good example of the sweaty 10-minute conversation. She says, babe, I want to have a sweaty 10-minute conversation with you. And we have the kids to make it a sweaty 2-minute conversation. Okay. And she goes, we had an agreement. So here's what I see is just state the facts. We had an agreement that you were going to be down here at 6. It's now 6:50. Okay. I can't argue with that because that is the facts, right? State how you feel. I feel frustrated because I've been working with the kids here by myself for the last hour. The nanny went home at 6. Here's what I would love. And then give a solution. What would you love? And create a new agreement. Number 3 is here's what I would love. That's establish a new agreement. What I would love is to simply know what to expect. I would love to know what to expect. I would love to know that if you're going to be done at 6, you're done at 6. If you're done at 7, you're done at 7. But let me know and honor that agreement. And when positioned that way, it's really, it leads you to a place of solution and it leads you to, I had all my excuses. Oh, my tech team called me and something broke and we needed to fix it. And even if the excuse was good, it still doesn't overwrite the idea that let's create an agreement. She goes, if you're going to be late, text me.
Right.
Text me. Let me know that you're going to be late so that I can at least know what to expect. And I said that, honey, that's absolutely fair. I apologize for not being down here on time, and I'm going to honor my agreement with you. And so that's just an example. That's a real life example of using the sweaty 10-minute conversation. Here's what I see. Here's how I feel, and here's what I want. And the real challenge is when most of us haven't been taught how to argue, so we learn by our parents or our friends.
Yes.
And most people will throw in phrases like, you're always late, you never come down on time, you're being selfish, you're putting yourself in front of our kids. And so then we start arguing about, she says you're always or never.
Right.
down here on time. And then I'm like, well, I start thinking about the one time last week I was on time. Well, last Monday I was on time. We start arguing about things that aren't really the issue versus actually really tackling the core root of the agreement itself.
In that moment. It's such a powerful practice, and it really helps when your partner is in it with you and they know the formula. I'll say just really briefly, I've used it myself with family and it's gone really well. I recently used it, without getting into all the details, with a colleague at the university that I teach with. And it was interesting. It had to be done because I work in close quarters. And for me, the word God works for me. I like the word God. So in my head, I was just saying, okay, God, give me the words, because the response. So, and the long and the short of it is, it doesn't always go the way you would like.
Right.
Initially. So because this colleague response was, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And I was like, oh, well, okay, how do we get around this one? That you shouldn't have felt that way. And we stayed in it and we stayed in it. And we got to a point where we were able to build that bridge of, love, right? But build that bridge of connection and communication. And it took a lot for me to be really cognizant of, in this moment, don't get let go of this defensiveness, let go of this. What the damn hell is he saying? I shouldn't feel that way. I'm wrong to have feelings, but he doesn't know this person didn't know the process, right? So it's just, and as you said, if you're not, if you don't have this skill set or haven't, engaged in this type of work, it could seem really foreign and like a complete attack. So we worked through it, and it was beautiful. And ultimately, it ended well. He was having stresses with what he was doing, and things in technology weren't working for him. And it became, I was kind of the collateral damage, right? So I felt some unskilled things.
Yeah. Well, and here's where it gets interesting, because the truth is, he's not responsible for how you feel. I'm not responsible for how my wife feels. And because while we get to have our feelings and our feelings are valid, we own our feelings, every one of us. And this might be some of the listeners are going to love this, and some of the listeners are going to reject this, because is that our feelings are our experience, and we own our experience. For example, two people in traffic, rush hour traffic. One person feels stressed, the other person feels peaceful. It's just based on how their perspective is of that moment. And so we're the ones who own our feelings. They're not responsible for causing how we feel. So the focus, I'm glad you brought that up, because the focus of the sweaty 10-minute conversation needs to be on the broken agreement.
Right.
And here's where most of the time it breaks down. Most of the time it breaks down because there was no agreement. There was no clear agreement, and there was assumptions. I thought you were going to be home at 6. And he's like, well, I was working late. Like, there was no clear agreement, which is really why the formula works well, because if there is an agreement, then it's really about ownership. Saying, hey, I'll give you a quick example of this. A month ago, I had a business colleague who was going to promote a product of mine. I promoted a product of his. And sent an email out. It generated X amount of people interested in that product. Our agreement was we were going to cross promote one another. Okay. So, and we had already done this before and had like really airtight agreements. And so we're coming back to do it again. And I didn't set up a clear agreement the second time about the amount of people we were going to send to one another. So I sent the same that I had sent last time, like a full blown amount. And then he sent for me and sent 1/10 of what he had previously sent. And so I got frustrated saying, well, hang on here. But I didn't actually create a new agreement with him on this round. So I sent him the sweaty 10-minute conversation via email. Bad idea. Don't do the sweaty 10-minute conversation via email. And I know better. I just got in a rush, and it did not go well. He responded back with, I said, hey, I'm feeling frustrated. Here's what happened. I sent you this. You sent me that. I'm feeling frustrated with this result. What can we do to create a win-win here? And he wrote back, well, I'm feeling frustrated. And he had all of his reasons about the fact that how the agreement got made, the timing of things didn't work for him. So he actually just did what he could with what he had. that was outside of my awareness. He like squeezed us in to one list that he had that he could promote to. The point of it being that it really highlighted, I took ownership. I said, you know what? I could have created a stronger agreement, which would have solved this whole thing. And the more that we can come from owning our part in it, I still came back to him and said, hey, what are we going to do to make this right? If we want to continue to promote one another, right? Then, but the more we can take ownership for our side in it, the more we're coming from our place of power. And so owning our emotions, owning any lack of agreements that were being made. And it's a great practice because it does really highlight when we've got clear agreements and when we don't.
And sometimes they're unspoken agreements. Sometimes we, again, where we don't have a connection like your colleague or, but in this way with this person, there's an unspoken, agreements that occur when you're working with people.
Oh yeah. Who's doing the chores?
And right? and shared, space and who's doing what and respectful. And just to tie that up, it ended up, beautiful. And I was able to, at some point I was able to get in there and just say, no, but because I know you want peace too, right? Don't you want to have peace? I was able to, and he was, well, I do, but and he was having some, I was able to help him with some computer technology things. And the next day, and we diffused and it was much better. And we actually hugged, which was remarkable because this is a person who I think, is coming from a very different background. And the next day, they
beautiful.
Yeah, even came in and said, hey, I'm really sorry about that. And this X, Y, and Z. And I was like, it's no problem. I totally understand. And it was like, because it was like a 10-minute sweaty conversation, maybe 15-minute, but it works. And I wanted to share this with you and our listeners. I talked about this last week briefly with, on our last podcast with Stephanie Puente. We're talking about this book that I love from Thich Nhat Hanh, Taming the Tiger Within. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but we were talking about it because it was part of the impetus for me to create this idea of radical love, in that you are, the first step is, as you've already talked about in other, of course, this is the Buddhist principle, and it's not, I didn't come up with this idea, but acceptance is the first step. So it's acceptance of what is, and as you had said, look, because without that acceptance, how can we find, as you said, the thread of truth? And we're able to, because I look at acceptance as we can neutralize the situation, whether the situation is external or often internal, the thoughts we have about ourselves, the thoughts we have about a situation, accepting what is, neutralizing, and then being able to move forward. But so the impetus for this idea came from Taming the Tiger Within, where Thich Nhat Hanh was this revolutionary idea in which he talks about loving your anger, actually treating it like a baby. That I hadn't heard before. He says you treat your anger, because most of us, I think, are taught, whether directly or indirectly, anger is bad. And the minute you feel anger, I shouldn't feel this way. Instead of actually saying, it's okay, anger. I see you, anger. You're okay. Love the anger. And he really does say, like a baby. The baby is crying. You don't say, dumb baby, stop crying. You say, it's okay. And you soothe the anger. And so I've had this for many years prior to being, married, but it has these great techniques. So I wanted to offer another technique, different than the 10-minute conversation, but I think it's really helpful. I use it, my husband and I, we use it when, in those moments when you're just not at that level to say, let's have a 10-minute sweaty conversation. So this is just a page. Says, if you are capable of writing or saying these 3 sentences, you are capable of true love. You are using the authentic language of love. So these are the 3 sentences.
Okay.
Darling, I suffer, and I want you to know it. Darling, I am doing my best. I'm trying not to blame anyone else, including you. Since we are so close to each other, since we have made a commitment to each other, I feel that I need your support and your help to get out of this state of suffering, of anger. So using these 3 sentences to communicate with the other person can quickly reassure and relieve him or her. The way you handle your anger will inspire a lot of confidence and respect in the other person, and in you. This is not very difficult to do. So, often it's just, for me, it's like, honey, I'm suffering. I need your help. And my amazing husband created his own response to that, which is, or not honey, rather, because I do use the word, we use the word darling. There's something about darling. And I love that Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk from Vietnam, is teaching us about love. It is so profound. But I said, darling, I need your help. I'm suffering. And his response is, I'm here for you, darling. And I tell you, brother, it neutralizes, if I'm hangry or if I'm in my head about school and, juggling the things, darling, I'm here for you. Oh, and it's just, I think, another beautiful way in which we can move through life with love, through radically loving the moment. Radical love means if we had a magic wand, we would make things different, but we can't. So we can love what is. We can come from the acceptance of it to neutralize. I believe, next step sometimes is to forgive what is. As your mentor and mine, your mother, Mary Mannon Morrissey, says that her definition of forgiveness is the most powerful I've ever heard. Is it's actually to give for a higher perspective, to give for the awareness of the perception of the awareness of love's presence. And that, so in forgiving, and then what would we love? Well, we would love peace in this moment. We would love to give ourselves a break. We'd love to, stop being as you used to be, as you said, so self-criticizing and judgmental. That was going to be one of my questions for you, because that's what I found for most people who are, when I see them in that really judgmental, critical way, I have that sense that they are that critical of themselves. And it's really a testament to you, my friend, in terms of, as you said earlier, that most people who know you now would go, what, Matt, you're like the most loving. And I can attest to that, my friends. Matt is one of the most, because you got a lot of stuff going on, and that's really cool. But who you are shines through, right? And it's an Emerson quote: who you are thunders loud, so I cannot hear what you have to say to the contrary. And who you are is this really remarkable, grounded person who, not only from my experiences with you, but when I've observed you with colleagues, strangers at live events, you're so grounded and so loving and so present. And that is a testament to all the work that you have done in being grounded and present and loving of yourself. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree that's where, absolutely, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
That's where it starts.
It's a foundation.
Yeah. So one takeaway for the audience on how to do that, which is counterintuitive, that I learned from Dr. Sri Carter Scott. And it is that to stop beating ourselves up for the mistakes that we make.
Yes.
Learn the lesson, but minimize the drama, minimize the volume of how we beat ourselves up. Learn the lesson and let it go. What's the lesson? Let it go. Because I would really beat myself up for making a mistake, I drive across town and forget the package that I needed back at the house and get to the place and be like, oh my gosh. And then the whole drive back, beat myself up about it. And, you're so stupid. I mean, this was back in the day. You're so stupid. You forget things all the time, blah, blah, blah. Well, what happens is our subconscious mind has an attention meter. And we've learned this, what we now know through parenting psychology, is that kids replicate behavior that they receive the loudest attention for. And their subconscious mind does not discriminate positive from negative attention. And neither does yours or mine. So if we give ourselves loud, negative internal attention, means the internal negative thoughts, intense thoughts, all of that, then we will actually more likely replicate that behavior that is getting, it's like if this was a volume meter, the behavior that we give loud attention for, we will actually replicate it. So if we beat ourselves up for sleeping in, we beat ourselves up for not eating right, we beat ourselves up for not being the right way, being awkward in a moment, we're like, oh, I'm so stupid. We do those kinds of things, we'll actually replicate that behavior. Instead, learn from it, forgive yourself, feel a warm wave of love washing over yourself, forgiving yourself, washing it away and saying, I'm stepping forward in the new, and here's who I am. And that calm and reinforcing, and then giving yourself loud reinforcement for the success that you're having, for the way that you're showing up, for starting a radical love podcast, for being on your green growing edge, for doing the things, for listening to this podcast. For those who are listening, you're taking time to invest in yourself, grow yourself, celebrate that, because that will actually then reinforce the positive behaviors. So many of us have been taught, don't brag, don't be conceited, don't celebrate yourself for the things you're doing well, beat yourself up for the things you're not doing well. That is actually counterproductive to how our minds are wired up, how our nervous system is wired up. So I began to really be a soft place to fall when I would have mistakes. I would start to change my internal dialogue around compassion and forgiveness and self-love. And it's a muscle.
Yep.
It's an exercise. Doing that over and over and over again I began to be very soft on myself, which then translated into loving and accepting others and not being triggered by others nearly as easily. And it's profound. It's profound how that works.
It's profound. And I love that. Two things to connect with something you just said. And then I was going to just read a section from your beloved grandma, and then if we could hear that lovely story about Irene's conversation to land into it. You know, there's a chapter in my book that I'm writing, Radical Love, How a Revolution in Love Will Transform Your Life. And it's called Don't Get Cocky, Kid, because I know you're a Star Wars fan, but there's that line, right? When Han Solo is telling Luke Skywalker, don't get cocky, kid. And that's what we're taught, right? Don't get cocky, don't get too arrogant. But this isn't about that. This is about a grounded, humble confidence of knowing who we really are in this world. And it is not arrogance. And it is something we should definitely, just to add on to what you said, to celebrate ourselves in the same way in which we up until now would berate ourselves for being human, for making mistakes. And I've shared this quote with you before in one of our conversations, but it's absolutely one of my favorites from Stephen Hawking, in that, you know, in the entire universe, there's no such thing as perfection. And if it weren't for imperfection, neither you nor I would exist. It gave me such relief to go, I can give myself a break, you know? And so just going back to what you talked about, because it's one of the things I had highlighted that was very moving, was you were having a conversation with your grandma. And again, y'all need to just get this book because it's extraordinary. But she was talking about how your grandfather had passed, and there were some things she hadn't let go of for herself and regrets that she had. And so I think there's two things we could take away from this really beautiful and vulnerable story, and how remarkable that she shared it with you, and it's in the book. But she said, I finally let go of the anger, she confessed. When I pressed her for an explanation, she said, ever since Jack died, I'd been so angry. Not at him, she hastened to add, but myself, for not taking advantage of every chance I had to be with him, to appreciate what we had together. And then she goes on to tell the story of, you know, that when he was in the hospital, and he said, come and lay in the bed with me. And she said, I wanted to, but I'm not going to do it, because her thought was, what would other residents think? And that's, who here can't relate to that, right? That part of us that goes, I won't want to do what my gut, what my intuition wants to do, to be playful, to be vulnerable, to be open in whatever way. And then that rehearsed, well-worn highway of thought that goes, what would people think? And so her great, lesson, and that she's sharing with you, is who cares what they would have thought? It would have been one more chance to hold him. And then she goes on to connecting it to the Stephen Hawking quote. You want to make the most of the small moments, but then she says, there's no such thing as a perfect marriage, just perfect moments. Those moments stacked side by side fill your life. God gives us a limited number of days. Don't take them for granted, because boy, does life go by fast. So, thank you, Grandma Dorothy Mannon, for her teaching, and for being the strong, powerful. And I know the background in terms of how you got to the place to take that journey with your friend and create the book. So thank you for that. And I think it fits pretty beautifully into what we've been talking about. And if you would like, I'd love to hear that vulnerable story about Irene, how you knew, like, this is my woman. You got it. And this is a story that will also, it's humorous, funny, lighter story. And it was the first, we had been dating for many months. We met long distance. So I lived in Oregon. She lived in Southern California. And so it was one of the first trips where she came out to hang out with me, visit me. She's staying in my place.
and it was my 30th birthday. And so we rented a cabin up in the mountains, and we had a bunch of friends coming. And so she was very good. She was like, don't think that anything's going to happen in this cabin, because it's not. I said, okay, that's fine. And, but we were going to stay in the same place, share a bed. And the first night I wake up and there's no Irene. Oh, where's Irene? You know, and I'm looking for her, and I go out into the hallway, and in the hallway is a futon that you can turn into a bed. She's sleeping out in the futon. Yeah. And I'm having these thoughts run through my head, like, why is she out in the futon? Like, did she get offended? Like, this was too fast for her. She didn't want to share a bed, and like she's creating her space. And so, you know, it's really early in the morning, and I was like, hey, babe. And she kind of is waking up. I say, hey, babe, what's going on? Why are you out here? And when you hear the reason that she was out there, I want you to know there were all kinds of reasons she could have given me that would have saved face, that would have been better reasons, quite frankly, that would have positioned her in a better light.
Powerful place.
But would have probably cost connection between us. But she decided to go with the truth. And I said, hey, babe, so why are you out here sleeping on a futon? And she was like, well, this is really embarrassing to say, but I was so gassy last night that I wanted to protect you and sleep out on the futon. And here's the funny part. As kind of vulgar, kind of off-putting that might be, it actually was the thing that I was like, she is so honest in this moment. I felt my heart swell with pride for her, and like this, like, wow, like she's so courageous to be so vulnerable. I thought, I'm so in love with this woman. I'm so in love with her. She can be that real, that raw. I mean, we didn't know each other that well. This is the first weekend that we're hanging out. We had dated, but it was the first like weekend that we're spending. So I was just so impressed with her, and it took courage. It was vulnerable. It was real, and I was like, I'm gonna marry this woman.
That's it. Because that's, you know, that you probably heard the saying in the beginning. We send in our representatives when we're dating. Send in that representative. But she was like, I'm not sending in my representative. I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be honest. And that's so beautiful that you also, I would imagine, because you've been doing so much work of your own and loving yourself, and, you know, letting go of that criticism that you once had of yourself. It was just, I'm just embracing this. This is remarkable. This is my person. And by the way, everybody listening, please check out Irene Boggs, Firma Jams.
Yes.
I got all her work. It's remarkable. She also is, you know, just doing this work in a beautiful way. If you want to keep your vibration high, you want to check out Firma Jams and all of her, where Matt can say this better, but, you know, combines music and affirmations. And one of my favorite things is just having my husband, like, just randomly in the kitchen start singing her lyrics. So
that's cool.
So cute. Yeah. And then one
really
of our favorite parts is when you're in there doing some singing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. People are wondering if Firma Jams, she's a singer-songwriter. And so some friends of ours who are into personal development said, there's no music that I can listen to that's infused with affirmations, that's upbeat, that's energizing, that like gets me ready for the day. It's all kind of meditational, and can you create something? And so this was, 6 years ago. She's created 2 amazing albums that are upbeat. They light you up, they energize you, and they're infused with positive affirmations. So you find yourself singing these positive affirmations. It's a great way to just embed a success mindset for yourself. And so that's at firmajams.com.
That's it.
People are interested in that. It's really great. She's also on iTunes. You can look for it on iTunes as well.
Unless something has changed, one you can get on iTunes, one you can only get at live events. So
that's true. That's true.
Check her out at Dream Builder Live or other live events. See where she's going to be. I've got both. So you got to get. They're really
good. They're really good. Yeah.
They're really great. They are. We got it in our computer and in our car, so we listen to it. Awesome. So. Thank you, my friend. What a beautiful experience this has been. And thank you for sharing, you know, all of your heart and your stories. And really just, I'm so grateful for, again, in your beautifully robust schedule, for making time for this. It's an honor and a privilege. And yeah.
Well, it is an honor for me. My mission is increasing love in the world one heart at a time. So I honor you for being on that same mission and applaud you for the great work you're doing, Corri. So thank you. It's been great to be on your show.
And by the way, before we sign off, I know you're going to want more of Mr. Matt Boggs. So you're going to be I'm certain you're going to want to be one of the, 500,000 followers he has on YouTube. So if you want to join that, they can just get you on YouTube, Matt Boggs, as well as any other thing you want to share with us and how they can contact you, my friend.
That's right. We've got a lot of great resources, ebooks that help you with self-love and acceptance. We have a self-love activation toolkit, a free meditation, a free ebook that's beautiful. And so they can get all that. If you're listening, it's interesting to you, crackingthemancode.com is where you can learn more, grab these free gifts, and there's a ton of great material that will support you in increasing love in your life.
Beautiful. Such a gift. Thank you for serving in the world in the way that you do, Matt. It's a pleasure. So from my heart to yours, I say thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome.
And to everybody listening, as always, I hope that you love big. I hope that you be brave. And I hope that you share your beautiful light with the world. Bye for now. Ahui ho.